Scott, and I'm a Capital Regions BOCES Public Information Specialist assigned to Mohonasen. It's my pleasure to moderate tonight's events and to formally welcome you to tonight's program. We'll start our evening with a presentation by Mr. Chris Ruberti, Assistant Superintendent for Business, who will provide an overview of the proposed 2019-20 spending plan that will go before voters on Tuesday, May 21st. Mr. Ruberti.
Take this as slide. All right, thank you very much. So yeah, I know that from seeing some of the faces out here that a lot of you guys have been here through the entire budget development process. But with the budget hearing, you kind of see the little bit of a change in the way that we're set up here, which is a majority of the budget presentations are done to the board with the public kind of in the background, and this one is meant to be more toward the public, which is one of the reasons that the Board of Education members themselves are actually out in the seats tonight. So this is meant to be a hearing that goes out to the public. People can ask questions and make sure that they understand the budget that's going to go out to vote next week. So what we do is try to give, throughout the process, we've given a lot of details on the different components and several of the things that have impacted the budget, so those major factors. What we do here is to try to give that big picture overview and make sure that people understand what they're voting on next week. So starting off at a glance, this year's budget is $54,355,000. The budget increase from last year is almost $1.3 million, which is a 2.43% increase. That carries with it a tax levy increase of a little over $1 million. One of the important things to understand on the slide that's up there is that 3.82% tax levy increase is within the cap that's designated by New York State. So that tax levy calculation that's been submitted to the state, it's a calculation we get from the state. It has different growth factors in it and some exclusions. And when you go through that process, whatever number is calculated, as long as you stay within that limit, you only have to get 50% of the vote plus one. One of the things that you see in some parts of the state and for some schools is they actually go for what's called a supermajority, which is when you exceed the cap and then you need 60% of the vote in order for the budget to pass. So we're within the cap, which means that 50% plus one applies to us. Obviously, throughout this budget process, it's been a very difficult one. These are the final staffing reductions that ended up in the 2019-20 budget. It's a total of 21.1 positions overall. You'll see at the bottom that of these positions, 9.4 positions ended up being due to attrition, and that's a combination of people resigning from positions and retiring from positions. Some of the retirements that we had 11 in our support staff unit, and we had 4 in the teaching unit. Some of those positions were filled, but some of those positions were not filled, which led to this. And then we had other people who left the district either during the year or we know they're leaving at the end of the year, and those positions are not being filled. So a total of 9.4 out of the 21.1 positions are through attrition. One of the major impacts when you have, especially when you have reductions in the budget like we had this year, is going to be on class sizes. So this is something that we put in this presentation every year. It's really important to look at our current enrollment and kind of across the board. So it's got our current enrollment and what the sections are at each grade level, the average class sizes in each grade level currently, and then looking at what that means for next year as we project out. So you'll see that it's very similar as far as the actual enrollments, but the number of sections have declined into 1920. And the net effect overall is it going from a 24.1 average class size in K-6, you'll see all the way up to a 26.6 average class size. Unfortunately, this has been a trend for the last couple of years as we've had layoffs. We got down into the very low 20s a few years ago, which was one of the things that the board was really promoting as those lower class sizes at K-6. But through the difficult budget times that we've had, we've seen those start to creep up as some of those layoffs have hit the elementary levels. This is a summary of our projected expenditures, and you'll see that it's in relation to what we had as our projected expenditures when the budget was adopted and approved last year. Some of the major ones to look at, you'll see that there are still large increases in things like instruction and employee benefits. And so those exist even with the reductions that we had in staffing. So every reduction in staffing carries with it not only a salary reduction, but also a benefit reduction. So these numbers before those reductions were made were much higher. One of the ones that I want to point out is employee benefits. We had our health insurance, as you guys know, went up significantly over the course of this, from last year to this year. And right now in this budget, the increase in our health insurance costs is still over $900,000. So you sit there and look at, well, why is it only going up $600,000 total? And that's because one of the things that really helped districts around New York State, not just ours, was the fact that the teachers' retirement system contribution rate decreased. And that decrease for us meant almost a $400,000 decrease in what we were paying into teachers' retirement system for next year. So those decreases in the teachers' retirement system throughout the state really helps to mask some of the things that we have on the revenue side, like foundation aid. So that reduction was extremely helpful in avoiding even more layoffs, but it's one of the reasons that those numbers for like instruction and employee benefits aren't bigger. And then the other one that I just want to point out is the debt service account. You see that going up slightly, our costs there, and that is the final piece of the project that we had that is coming on to our debt service. So you'll see at the bottom those same numbers of that $54,355,000 and about $1.3 million increase. And if we go to the revenue side, you'll see the same numbers at the bottom, which is what makes a balanced budget. On this slide, though, you see the state aid increase of $430,000. And one of the things that I want to be able to point out there is the actual foundation aid increase, which is that true money that we have to fund the following year's expenses, was $130,000. We got a 1% increase in our foundation aid. Right now, going into, again, by the formula, going into 1920, for next year, if you look at the state formula and what we should be receiving based on that formula, it's still over $4 million below what we should be receiving based on that formula. So, you know, obviously that's been a huge topic, specifically in our district, but certainly throughout the state as well. And I think the community did a great job of rallying around and talking to legislators, and we need to keep that going as future years move on, because that is a major, major factor as to what's been going on with our budget in the last few years, but also, again, throughout the state. So that's really something to look at. The tax levy that we talked about before, that 3.82%, comes to just over $1 million. You'll see that some of these items are flat. Just a couple to mention, the BOCES rental, we had a little bit of a shift at the CAP building where we have a rental agreement with BOCES, and then every year there's an adjustment to some of the special education classrooms that we rent out to BOCES. So that's the difference there. And the interfund transfer, that's also related to the capital project. So what happens is, as the project has been slowly coming on the tax levy, we've been decreasing the amount of money that we've had to transfer over to help pay for it. So that should be actually this $175,000 in 1920 should be the final time that we have to transfer money to assist with the capital project. The other revenue that you see on there is different fees and things like that we collect. Specifically, though, some of the impact there is a change in what we're seeing in interest rates and projecting out the money that we will actually make in interest that we have in the bank, especially for the few months after we receive taxes from the community. We have a significant amount of money in the bank because that's when most of our revenue comes in. And then throughout the year, obviously, that dwindles, but that's a projection out as to what we would be receiving in taxes, or in interest, I'm sorry. So one of the requirements actually for the state during a budget hearing is to break the budget into these components. It's program, capital, and administration. And I think it gets a little bit confusing with this. And one of the reasons is if you look at the different line by lines in the budget and you see similar things, what happens is the employee benefits, that $13 million, on the three-part budget, that gets dispersed to each one of these different areas. So it makes each one of those areas look significantly higher as far as the amount, because I know often a question that we have is you talk about the instruction side, and then you come here and you say, well, why is that $11 million higher? And that's because a majority of those benefits are going to the instruction side of the house. So as you disperse those out, this is one of the ways that the state makes every school district in New York State report out to the community. And one of the things that's and the pieces are out there, but in the budget newsletter that we have is they actually give a breakdown in all the components that come up with each one of these. So program, capital, administration, and they give you a sample of what falls under each of those. So, you know, it's definitely something to take a look at if you have questions. So the impact on taxpayers is obviously a huge piece and something that the board takes into consideration every year. What we want to do, though, is a couple of years ago, we wanted to start showing what the true impact is on taxpayers. So the way that you get there is when you do that tax levy limit calculation that I spoke about earlier, one of the factors in that is a local growth factor. And what that means is that your tax base is increasing. So the part of taxes that you collect that are part of a growth in the community actually doesn't impact the individual homeowner. So what that actually means is, so say you have 20 people that are helping to pay taxes, and the taxes go up by $100. So if the community didn't get any bigger, each one of those people would be responsible for $5. But if that community doubled to 40 people and it went up $100, now they'd be responsible for $250. So it's a relatively simple way to put it and kind of extreme because it wouldn't cut it in half. But basically, the more tax base you have, the less it's going to impact an individual homeowner. So that's why we like to show if there was no growth what that would be, which is about $105. But based on that growth factor, we look at about $74 to $75 is the estimate of what it would impact a homeowner who has a home worth $150,000, which is right around the average home cost in the district. So some of the things that is contingent upon would be if houses get reassessed, if the equalization rate with the state changes. Those are things that we don't have control over. The town does the assessments and the state does the equalization rates. But assuming that those stay where they are now, the impact for an individual homeowner would be in that $74 to $75 range. The other thing that's on the ballot next week is the bus proposition, and this is something that the board adopted a few meetings back. For next year, we're looking at two 33-passenger buses, which have become needed for some of the smaller runs that we have and even into some of the smaller neighborhoods where the big buses can't get in. And then 4 full-size, which are now 72-passenger buses. So they had always been these 66-passenger buses, and last year we started for the first time to get, it's basically one more row of seats, but they're really helpful on some of those more crowded runs. So 6 total buses, and you'll see that they're both gasoline. We've also been moving from diesel to gasoline buses. The impact on the taxpayer, you'll see that this is one of the things that's aided by the state at whatever your transportation ratio is. So the proposition itself starts off with at about $610,000. It'll come in just under that for the actual cost of the buses. But the impact will hit in the 2021 budget, not in this one, and it should be about a $10,000 total impact by the time you do it over 5 years and figure in state aid. And the other thing we have is every year there are, since all bus bonds are 5 years, there's always one falling off as another one comes on. So the impact is relatively minimal. Especially when you look at $610,000, it looks huge, but it's about a $10,000 impact, and that's a year out from now. One of the things to mention too with the bus proposition is we have a great we have a great transportation department, specifically our head mechanic who does a great job of keeping the buses going, but there hits a spot where we have this replacement cycle to be able to see when the buses are costing more as used buses than they would as new. So that's really what we follow, and it projects out about 5 years, and then we update as needed every year because obviously just like your own car at home, sometimes you have problems you didn't expect or something lasts a lot longer than you thought it might. So what I think many of you are here to see, we do have some Board of Education vacancies. We have 2 of the 7 seats are up, and we have all 4 of our candidates here who you're going to meet in just a minute. Their names are up there in the same order that they will be on the ballot. They run for 3-year terms starting July 1st, 2019. And the information that is out there in the budget notice is also available online. So you'll be able to get this information. And then after tonight, later this week, the video of the Meet the Candidates night along with the budget hearing will be available on the website as well. So, you know, if you have people that couldn't make it tonight and you want to tell them to go there Thursday or Friday of this week, they'd be able to go on there, take a look, and be able to see what the candidates have to say. We also want to mention the contingent budget rules, and I'm going to go back to the tax levy limit calculation one more time. But if we don't get the 50% plus 1 of a vote, the board would need to get back together, decide if we go out for another vote with the same budget, another vote with a different budget, or just move to a contingent budget. So what a contingent budget would mean is that you have no increase in your tax base. So that little over $1 million, that $1,042,000, if for some reason we had to go to a contingent budget, that would then in addition have to come out of the revenue side of next year, and we'd have to make the corresponding reductions to get to that $1 million. So It's one of the reasons that you see most districts staying within the tax levy limit calculation so that they only have to get that 50% plus one, because it is a pretty big penalty to have your budget voted down. So it's one of the reasons that you try to go out there with a reasonable tax levy limit. We're going to do a feature update in just a moment. So I know you can't see it up there, but on May 21st is the budget vote itself and voter eligibility rules. You have to live in the district for at least 30 days to be eligible to vote. And absentee ballots are available as we speak in district office. If you're going to be mailing them in, they actually have to be in the mail by tomorrow, so they have an opportunity to mail them out and get them back. If somebody's coming in to pick them up, they can come in as late as May 20th to pick those up. Thank you, Elisa. All right, so I know that's relatively quick to go through a lot of stuff, but any questions from anyone? All right, thank you very much for listening again for many of you. And we will get on to meet the candidates. We're just going to take a minute to get everybody set, and then we'll start up in about 2 minutes. Thanks.